Planning Commission, the Delta County Board of Commissioners, and we also have Board of Adjustments here. So we'll go through here in just a second and do an introduction. We'll just go down the line so everybody gets named. If you got a name tag, please turn it around so it faces out.
I know who I was.
We'll figure it out.
If you forget, you can turn it back around and
Yeah,
remind
that
yourself.
was my problem.
Victoria will help. Jacob Gray is going to be running a little late. He's with his family at the doctor. He let Robbie know, so he'll join us when he can. But I want to thank everybody for being here, Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment. I want to thank the staff, particularly they've been prepping for this work session, Brittany, Kate, Lindsay, and others for a number of weeks, getting us all ready. I want everybody to know that the Board of County Commissioners has built upon the work from the 2022 Land Use Code. While it wasn't adopted, we have been working with the public comments, citizens groups, and professional advice for a long time now, 6 months. We've incorporated those comments into this draft. It's a compendium of all that previous work. Our goal was to utilize all the efforts and expertise to make this land use code specific to Delta County. Tonight, with the help of Mr. Holm here, it's Planning Commission's opportunity to sit with these commissioners and see what we did. I hope you see your previous work in here because it is valuable. This was much harder than I expected it to be. Land use, as Don says, is probably his least favorite thing to work on. It's certainly not perfect, but it is our best attempt at perfect. And it is a product of many, many hours of evaluation, discussion, and hard thought. Tonight, the commissioners would like to get your input, ideas, corrections, and see where the evening takes us here in these discussions. We all have an agenda, and then we'll run with it here in a second. But I want to say thanks again. And Carl, thank you in particular for your professional work on this. You've done exactly as the commissioners have asked you to do, and that shows here. So for introductions, we'll start with Victoria down there.
Victoria Turner, District 3.
I'm Matt Clark. I'm, what do you call me, an alternate, an associate member of the Planning Commission for District 3.
Hardy Hutto, District 2, Surface Creek. Steve Schrock, District 1, Delta Planning Commission.
Jay Locke, District 2, Surface Creek Planning Commission.
Tom J, District 3.
Cindy Watson, District 1, Delta.
Wayne Ronas, District 2, Associate.
Kate Darlington, District 3.
Everett Neal, Code Compliance.
Lindsay Mitchell, Public Information Specialist for Delta County.
Kate Kirk, I'm the planner for Delta County.
Brittany Hanning, I'm the planning tech for Delta County.
John Durham, the Delta County Attorney.
Carl Holm, Special Projects for the county.
Robbie LaValle, Delta County.
Don Supis, Delta County Commissioner.
Wendell Coates.
Mike Lane, Delta County Commissioner. Mike Twombly, District 1.
Ron Hayes, District 1.
Thanks. Mike, Don, did you have anything to add this evening before we get started, Mr. Holm?
I don't.
I just want to echo a little bit of what Wendell said. You know, we did pretty much go through this line by line, start to finish. And you know, I've got 13-year-old twin boys, and I tell them all the time that perfection is unattainable, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So this you know, it's far from perfect, but I feel like we are a lot closer than we were a year ago or even 3 years ago. So hopefully we can punch out the final details and go from there. So I wanted to echo my thanks to Carl and all the staff for the effort on this.
And Mr. K is vice chair before Jacob was here. Did you have anything to add?
Kate's Vice Chair.
Oh, Kate's the vice chair.
I'm in them.
No, I don't have anything in particular. Again, thanks you guys, commissioners, for taking another stab at it, relieving us from a little bit of work for a while. Hopefully we have some good feedback for you.
Thank you, Kate. Carl, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay. So, just again, kind of following what Wendell had mentioned, that we started from the draft that the Planning Commission had certified back in 2022. Started around February, and we've been many work sessions going through the entire document. The current version is redlined against the 2021 land use code, is dated July 18th. That was the last changes that the board had made. And so that's the version that we're working from at this point. Also cleaned up the formatting, so things like having a header that has chapter numbers, trying to make it easier to find things through the land use code. The board asked for an executive summary, so there's a draft executive summary as far as kind of how to work through the land use code. And then I'm gonna go through what some of the major changes have been from the last time that the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustments saw this document. So starting in chapter 2, land use, that was really there was a lot of discussion around this chapter. I think the biggest change is that taking out permitted use and site plan review, so that the 3 levels of review, allowed use, and defining that as there's no planning review, but it needs to meet the standards of the land use code, and it's on the property owner to meet those standards and obtain whatever permits are required, access permit, if they have, water, make sure they have that, and septic permits, those kind of things. Then limited use becomes more of like what permitted use and site plan review was. Again, looking at access, water, septic, and looking at how it does or doesn't meet the standards of the land use code. Similar to the way it was before, limited use might require public notice. So there wasn't any change to conditional use though. Table 2B has been revised. So again, taking out wherever there was a P for permitted use under the 2021 code, or S for site plan review when the Planning Commission was going through it. And it's either an A, an L, or a C. The L might require public notice. Temporary uses, specifically discussion around special events and home businesses. And then the use-specific standards, a lot of discussion around additional residences, adding some standards relative to kennels, and then, of course, there was the solar and wireless. Wasn't a lot of change to that, but those are big changes in the land use code because they weren't in 2020. So the temporary uses, again, this is in chapter 2. Special events includes, there's exemptions of things that do not require any type of review. And then there's also a list of standards, and as long as those standards are met, it's an allowed use, doesn't require any review. It might require other permits though. Again, as an allowed use, if you're serving food and you have you might need a permit from environmental health, that type of thing, not other land use type things. And then if it doesn't meet the standards, or for the event venues, like we've had some applications for event venues, that would be a limited use and would require public notice. So it would be still limited use, just as a reminder, is administrative review. Public notice would go out to the neighbors, but it would be able to be approved at the staff level. Hold on, home business. What?
I can't see.
That one. There you go. So home business, combined what was home business, cottage industry, refine the standards, it's an allowed use as long as it meets the standards. If there is a significant impact, noise, dust, something like that, then it would become a limited use, and again, public notice, and again, limited use is administrative review. Next slide. So then there were some use-specific standards. There's a number of uses that have standards in the land use code beyond just the general standards of setbacks and things like that. As I mentioned, there's a lot of discussion about additional residences. Where this draft has landed is the first single-family residence and one accessory dwelling unit is an allowed use. For 2 or more residences, it's a limited use. So again, that's site plan review. It doesn't require public notice, but it's administrative review. Basically looking at, does it have water, does it have access, and make sure that there's adequate area for septic. OWTS means septic. For kennels, we included some standards around the kennels. It was allowed use in 2021, still an allowed use, but now there's some standards in order to classify, setbacks, noise that might come from a kennel. Those kind of things have been incorporated. And then as mentioned, solar, telecom, or wireless have been incorporated. Not much change from what the Planning Commission did in that certified copy. Chapter 3, variation to lot size, and this is where the Board of Adjustments spends a lot of time. We've had a lot of variances for lot size. The main changes to the variation in lot size is it has to be an A20 or A35 zone. Those are the only zoning designations where a variation to lot size would be allowed. They've allowed a 2-lot subdivision, minor plat. One of the lots needs to meet the minimum acreage per the zoning. So say you're in the A20, you have 25 acres, you can have 5 acres with a variance, and then the other lot would be 20 acres. Setbacks, where it was just simply 25 feet from the front, 15 feet from the interior property lines, that's been revised, so there's now 5 foot from the interior property line if it's a non-habitable structure, like a barn, a garage, that type of thing. Identified that they're 50 foot from waterways and 25 feet from open unlined irrigation ditches. That was added in there. So the site design, chapter 4, had a discussion relative to the access. There was a previous resolution relative to subdivision 35 plus acres and street plans. That's been deleted. It's in state statute, and so we're just referring to the state statute. And then the county road standards, we made sure that the land use code and the county road standards align and added some detail. I think one of the main things is that if you have a subdivision where there's 3 or more lots, the access and a shared access for 3 or more lots becomes a local road and has to meet the local road standards. That's in the county road standards. It wasn't in the land use code before, so we made sure that it's there to have that consistency. We added language relative to special flood hazard areas, specifically development in the floodplain or a floodway. There are separate regulations relative to that, but we included in the land use code to make sure that people are aware when you're developing of what happens when you have a floodplain or floodway on your property. Chapter 5, public facilities. The traffic impact studies made reference to the International Traffic Engineer Manual and added some director discretion. So there's some times where there are some things that are not required in a traffic study, but there was a list that would require it. The director has discretion to say you don't need to have that as part of the traffic impact study. Also in that chapter, again, a lot of discussion around cisterns. In 2021, the land use code said no cisterns for residential use. That's been adjusted. It really is focusing on hauled water. If you have a cistern where you have spring fed or well fed or some other that you have a water source where you have a water right to, that's not where the concern was. The concern was the hauled water. So creating some parameters around that. The first dwelling and the first ADU is allowed in an area where you cannot get a well, you don't have a water tap, then you can have a cistern. And if you have development that exceeds that was put in prior to January 5th, 2021, it's grandfathered in. But now, then if you want to add another unit, then you would come into, the cistern issue would come into play. But we added the potential to request a variance. So say you have existing 2 lots, it's on a cistern using hauled water, and you need a 3rd lot, if you can make the case for a variance, it would go to the Board of Adjustment to consider a variance to allow that additional development with the cistern. Next slide. So we put all the standard review process into chapter 7. There were some things that we brought in from other parts of the code. I think the main thing is we had the development application ordinance. I think intent is for that development application ordinance to go away. The pieces that we wanted to keep out of that was integrated into the land use code. And specifically, that just requires site plan review, access permit, assigning an address, and septic. We added as I mentioned, for an allowed use, having to meet those minimum standards, so what is the expectation of the property owner? It's clear. And then we listed different codes and ordinances that have been adopted that are relevant. There's some that are still under discussion, like the Highway 50, Highway 92 overlay districts, where building permits are required. There's still discussion on that to be had with the municipalities. Added clarification of the ability to have informal consultation, where before everything went through a pre-application, it was very formal. That if people can come in and just have an informal conversation with the planning department about what they want to do. It doesn't have to be all formal. Added timelines, and with the timeline specifically relative to calendar days, just so that it's, again, there's a expectation on our side too, as far as how much time we have to turn things around. Added the section about neighborhood meetings, which the planning commission had actually helped put together, but that is still in there as well. Types of review, again, consolidated all that into chapter 8. There were various sections of the land use code under 2021, including allowed use, again, what's expected of the property owner to comply with for an allowed use, even though you don't need to come in for review. There are some types of permits you will need to come in for, an access permit, for example, a septic permit, that type of thing. With the limited use, again, making it more of the way the permitted use or site plan review was, and instead of may be approved by the director, shall be approved by the director. As long as it meets the standards of the land use code, it can be approved or conditionally approved. The director does not have the ability to deny it as they did before. Conditional use, added context to application requirements. We've had some big applications come in that we went through what was needed for that application to have enough information to make a decision. So now that's built into the land use code of what that is, as well as an assessment. There's different types of studies, biological, whatever, that may be required, not necessarily required. And then annual report. So once a conditional use permit is approved, that there's annual review to make sure the conditions are being complied with in the context that the county had approved it. With the variance, the findings remain unchanged. However, there's been some additional language as far as helping to define what hardship are, some standards around hardship. In chapter 11, that's relative to non-conforming uses. Added some clarity of what is lawful or legal non-conforming versus unlawful, meaning even when it was built, it didn't meet the standards at that time. Legal non-conforming is it met the standards at the time that it was built, but now with the changes in the regulations, it doesn't comply. If you have an allowed use and you're changing that allowed use, and even though it's non-conforming, there's no effect. You don't have to do anything. There's no impact. Again, added a variance option. So if you have a legal non-conforming use and you want to convert it, and say if there's a 50% threshold and you're at 51%, you could ask for a variance and say, I still want to be able to do this and not have to bring it up to standards, or I can bring it up to these standards, but I can't meet these other standards. So that's where the variance would come into play. And then some language relative to when a change of use kicks in relative to the non-conforming and would require to be brought up to the current standards. All the subdivision regulations have been put into chapter 12. All the planning commission and surveyor recommendations were taken into account. The planning commission, you had kind of deferred for discussion relative to stewardship areas. The board has actually put some language into requiring a stewardship plan and what is what is required in a stewardship plan. Again, bringing in timelines for the review process, and then also some language relative to when a plat expires, the ability to get extensions, beef that up and added some flexibility for people to be able to develop if they aren't able to meet the other timelines. Just a couple other things kind of note. Again, timelines were added into the appeals section, and the planning commission, you had a lot of discussion around the timelines. Enforcement chapter was cleaned up quite a bit, kind of more following statute, and that was done in concert with the county attorney's office. Some of the definitions that were discussed, abandoned, an applicant or an application, authorization, what is a day, business day versus calendar day, those definitions have been included. We defined existing, kennel, when it becomes a kennel versus you just have animals at your house, and a non-habitable structure, right-of-way, storage facility, and we defined vacate. Some of the definitions were cleaned up because they were taken from the wireless resolution that had been kind of standalone, and when it got brought in, it's not meant to have a broader application, so there was some cleanup there to, if it was really just specifically for wireless, to make that clear in the definitions, or if it has a broader application, then to have that language reflect that as well. So those are the changes, and then that's where we are today. The next step, as the chair mentioned, there's additional board work sessions potentially with different interest groups. Ultimately, the Board of County Commissioners will finalize the land use code, and then by statute, they have to send it to the Planning Commission for you to report to the Planning Commission, or to the board, and then there will be public hearings held by the board once all that is done. Those aren't necessarily in order, but that's part of the conversation to have tonight. Following the land use code, there was a lot of discussion about how the zoning isn't quite right, and so, do we amend the zoning maps once we get the language in the land use code? As I mentioned, so the ordinances, the development application ordinance, the Highway 92 and 50 overlay district ordinances, intergovernmental agreements that are related to land use, the land use fees, as well as the impact fees that are referenced in the land use code to be adopted by a resolution separately by the Board of County Commissioners. That's all I have, unless there's anything the board members that I missed or kind of the main points.
I didn't even have to have Robbie kick you, you've got through that pretty quick.
Mike, Don, any other thing to add to our presentation?
No, I think Carl hit the high points pretty good there. I mean, there was a lot of details. There was a lot of time spent in this process doing cleanup work, just wordage, trying to make it understandable, make it a little easier to read. We did spend a lot of time doing that wasn't discussed by Carl, but I think he hit most of the high points. So
I think one of the interesting things was the definition of the words that we use. Vacate comes to mind. If you have a resident that is nobody's living there, well, they went on a 6 month vacation, and there's some people go on a year-long vacation, so they're with the idea of them coming back, so the structure really isn't vacant. They're planning on coming back and living there, and so things like that, minor things like that, kind of made us stop and think, well, now exactly what do we mean? What is the definition? And I think Carl and his crew did a good job in cleaning that up, and with the input that we had and the input that they had, it helped out a lot.
And Jacob, glad you can make it. We did the introductions earlier, but I'd like to kick it to you. Sure. And since this is a work session, then we're gonna lead into the Q&A part here pretty quick. So,
Yeah, I guess at the pleasure of the board, how do we want to proceed? Do we have notes? I know I have some questions. Do we want to go, chapter by chapter? How does the planning commission want to proceed here? Any thoughts? Mr. Kay?
Just for clarification, we have 30 days by statute to do this, is that correct?
From the time that we actually present it to you, we have to do it as an action of our board.
Is
So
this the?
this is not the action of our board. We have to do it in a board meeting where we submit to you guys, our revision, and so.
So the clock's not
The
started?
clock has not started. We want to wait until, we wanted to make sure that you guys had a chance to review it and make sure you were comfortable before we did that, so.
And is that 30 days concrete in your minds? Is that?
I think the board can allow more than that. I think I'd have to look at the statute again, but I think it's at least 30 days.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of unsure to me how much time we take.
Well, and we've got a lot of other steps to take here. I mean, once we get this kicked to you guys officially, like Carl mentioned, we've got to meet with municipalities over IGAs. We've got a lot of other groups. We need to have some public comment time that we can actually get out to the public and let them look this over and get some feedback from the public. So there's a lot of details that have to be done before we're going to be ready for approval. So
Yeah, we're not gonna-
I would imagine it's going to be far more than 30 days for us to get to that point. So.
Would you bring up the slide with the next steps again? Yeah, where do you see public hearings falling into this? And where do you see the planning commission helping?
We've talked about this several times, and the public hearings pretty much after we've come to consensus with you guys that this is where we want to go, then that's probably when we'll start the public hearings, because we don't want to go into public type meetings without a fully complete document. So that was our general thought.
We'd like to get it as close as we can and get substantive public comments on this. What's it mean to us? Because there's always the unintended consequence. And people will find it. And we'd like to.
Are you done? You're not done with changes then, or amendments?
We're looking for questions and input, ideas from you guys.
Okay.
The BoCC is, we think we're done.
Okay.
And so logistically, do you want all that feedback now? Do you want us to go into separate work sessions amongst ourselves? How do you see us proceeding?
We have saved, we got a placeholder for another work session like this for August 16th, a couple weeks out. How do you guys want to move forward?
That's next week. Is that it?
Yeah. Another week.
So I guess,
Go ahead.
yeah, are you looking for each one of us to kind of, make comments with our own notes or some sort of consensus with?
I mean, I expect all you to say, man, you guys did a great job, let's move forward. But, let's be reasonable here, so. No, I mean, fire away, I think,
Okay.
everybody brought notepads and pencils, let's get after it.
So, some of the things that came up in front of us quite a bit last year were the new clustered subdivisions, stewardship. I personally would like to see us maybe just review that and see, I know some changes happened, but it was, I think one of the biggest things we all encountered was that there really wasn't like a size of like stewardship. It seemed to be like a very vague amount of property and maybe what it could be used for, and it kind of coincided when somebody was trying to do what they call a clustered subdivision and potentially maybe put on a barn dominium or things of that caliber. So I know that on page 58, if we want to go to that or if we want to go more in order, Jacob and What do you feel? You want to go more in order through this?
Do we wanna look at language while we're here? Okay, yeah, we can pull it up easily.
Carl, will you lead us on chapter verse on the cluster? and stewardship?
So it's on page 58 of the, and it starts out up on the top, B, rural residential uses. And it starts talking about A is stewardship areas.
Okay.
But the
I'm
chapter,
taking it off of what
What's our
Carl
chapter?
sent us.
Oh, okay. Chapter 2.
Yeah, that was, I just opened up the issue. It says chapter 2 up on the right corner, and it's page 58 at the bottom of 270.
Carl, where at in the file folder does it say?
So it's page 58 of 270.
So Cindy, what's,
I guess just more, a little bit more clarification. I mean, it was something that kind of, came in front of us, but we didn't have a lot to go by with what really merits the size of a stewardship. Let's say somebody has 20, an A20, and they're looking at trying to do a cluster subdivision or something like that. They had to leave so much land as stewardship. And what really determines how much of that land is actually, I mean, they had building envelopes in some of the areas.
Isn't it driven by the size of the subdivision, the housing unit? You've got
That's
two.
what I thought, Mike, but I was looking here and it didn't particularly say it was based on the size.
Cindy,
of-
we didn't specify.
Section 3.
Chapter 12, section.
So the
3.
definition of stewardship, that is, you have that in front of you. That's in chapter 12, section 3.
Right, page 250. Well, depending on your document.
Okay, all right.
We did not specify size and configurations of stewardship areas other than identifying those natural resources that would look to be protected.
And well, in chapter 12, under the design and then the lots, building envelope shall not exceed 1 acre of the stewardship area. Stewardship area shall make up a significant portion of the total parcel area. And that was language that the planning commission had kind of landed on. The board retained that.
I have one, I guess, I don't know if it's just a typo or a clarification. Chapter 12, section C4, the design approach with the 1 through 9, or the, talking about requirements for the building envelopes. Mine is page 219, I'm not sure.
216?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep scrolling down there. Just, there's keep going. Yeah, there's 1 through 9, minimize flood hazards, minimize reduce wildfire. Number 3 is minimize irrigated agricultural land. I didn't know if that was supposed to say minimize impact to irrigated agricultural land or minimize the building envelope on irrigated land. Anyways,
Yeah.
I needed a little clarification.
That was a test to make sure you were reading. Good job.
Yeah, it changed from avoid irrigated,
Yeah.
so it should be
Yeah.
minimize
Okay.
impact to, yeah.
Just since we're there in chapter 12.
I think we're gonna go rapid fire if anyone has something at the top of their mind.
Okay.
Just,
Well, if we're gonna stay on stewardship areas, I think we'll stay on stewardship. I mean, if we're gonna change the subject, which could happen in a second, then we should wait till Cindy has had maybe her questions finished and answered. I don't know.
I just want to make sure that we have more clarification on the stewardship, that's all. I know that there's a building envelope and that specifies where a structure's gonna go within that, but, I'm asking on their stewardship, let's assume somebody has it now as stewardship, and then later they say, hey, I wanna make it a bigger subdivision than what I have. I wanna take some of that stewardship land and I wanna now turn it into more lots. I'm assuming that comes back in front of the Board of County Commissioners and the planning, department to say, hey, this is what I'd like to do.
If you
Or is
look at-
that set?
If you look at under number D5,
Okay,
it does talk about the stewardship plan shall be recorded.
okay,
And it shall be managed as a stewardship area for at least 20 years.
okay. There it is.
So in that vein, and I have questions on other issues, but I'll stay on stewardship. If I have a lot that's 820, and it's 20 acres, and I want to put 2 homes on it, and maybe call it a cluster subdivision, and then subdivide it, but I want, one of the remaining lots won't be 20. Can I create a stewardship area and avoid the restriction that we have in there for having, subdividing 20 acres into something that won't be a 20-acre lot?
The stewardship area allows the lots to be less than are required without a variance, so the answer is yes.
So the stewardship, it can travel across lot lines.
Yes.
But the building envelopes have to be minimally 1 acre.
1 acre, right.
Minimally or maximal?
Minimum.
Minimum. And they
So
have to be
we-
within that envelope.
We talked about flexibility as a
Max.
prime
Shall
element
not
for
exceed 1 acre.
stewardship areas.
For the area that you can develop on the lot.
That was
Shall
also.
not exceed, so at max there'll be an acre, the building envelope will be an acre.
For a clustered subdivision.
Right.
Correct.
Is that per residence or for everything that you're doing clustered? And we just had a hearing on a 2-lot subdivision, and there's a tremendous amount of objection to subdividing it because it didn't, there was a variance because it didn't meet the qualifications that left it 1 lot in the 820. But if they went to a clustered subdivision and didn't put their homes both homes next to each other, they would, but yet put the rest of the ground in the stewardship area, they would technically adhere to this, they would be able to subdivide.
Yeah, and again, right now, we don't have that 1 acre minimum or any, we had a clustered subdivision where the total acreage was 19 acres, they created 6 lots, and, about 7 acres total out of that was put in stewardship area. So that's where this, I think, was coming from, and I know when the planning commission was talking about it, like, well, we need to start somewhere, and, this may not be perfect or exact, but, that's why the language is a little more general as far as stewardship area shall make up a significant portion of the total parcel
Right.
area. There was no
Okay.
number. in
That's
there.
what I was asking. I guess that was my
It's
question.
just the
That-
building envelope of how much would
There
be
we go.
developed would be
So right now, we don't have a specific number, if that's what you're looking for,
not for that.
not for that. Okay, that was really what my question was. Just have some clarity on that.
And would you want to see specific numbers?
No, I know there was something we brought up a couple different times, with that word just kind of came up, the clustered subdivision, and we had a lot of discussion about, that type of a subdivision and falling into being, below the minimum, 5 acre, type of thing, so, okay, that answered my question, that's all I was just asking. Thank you.
So Jacob, go back to your original question. I guess I'd like to make sure that the planning commission feels that they have enough time to be able to speak about things amongst ourselves, I guess, at our own work sessions, to be able to
I think so.
ferret or work out maybe issues so that, we get a lot of input from each other that sometimes is really useful to sort of keeping the comments straight, including myself. I can go way off tangent. So I just want, I value our own meetings to be able to not go out in the public saying, hey, this stinks. Until somebody says, no, that doesn't really stink.
Can't we reserve the right to have our own meeting and maybe come back to some of these
Absolutely.
issues and
Well,
think
once
about
they-
them and then,
Once they give it to us, they give it to us, but there's 30 days, or unless we ask.
but we were having these series of meetings with them, if I understood it correctly, up until.
We were gonna do tonight, Steve, and then there's an option of doing it again. if you
Yeah.
guys would like to.
But we could have our own meeting in this interim period and still try to kick some of this around.
Absolutely.
I guess that's a question, I mean, procedurally, do you wanna kinda give the planning commission some time to have some work sessions, board of adjustment, whoever,
I
and
think
then
that,
come back to you?
I think that was the full intention, was to give a chance. This tonight was more just kind of, to make sure, if there's any major issues that we see that we need to get in front of before we go into those individual work sessions. I think that was the general thought behind tonight, so.
One of the things I'd hoped for is that, and I thought I saw it someplace, is that this would be kind of a discussion about the 30,000-foot view of where you guys were at, what you were thinking. We had all the public input and consternation about the land use code and how that impacted your thinking and what it meant for your draft. Because I had some thoughts about that too, things that I thought, by virtue of the public comments and concerns on private property, that we missed some things about private property rights of neighbors in relationship to the private property rights of people that wanted to do something, develop their own properties. And I'm still wondering in this, how much of that you thought about when you went through it, the neighbor property rights. I mean, because they are there and they're significant. And we've always seen ourselves kind of trying to decide between the competition of property rights. I mean, but that's what it is. It's the individual property rights of the developer or landowner versus their neighbor property rights. We try to arbitrate those. And I'm not so sure we always give the neighborhood the benefit of the doubt. We have that now requirement that the neighborhood has to have some sort of meeting, Carl, right?
Correct.
And that's a requirement on,
For anything that's coming to the planning commission or the board, so conditional uses and preliminary plats.
but not limited.
Limited use is administrative, no, there's no public hearing.
See, that's something that I would like to look at a little bit. I know limited use, or limited permits are not even coming to the planning commission. As an example, chicken houses, I think, are all limited uses, limited permits. And I guess that's the way we set it.
Depending on the size and the,
If I looked at that correctly,
Yeah, it's dependent
they're all
on-
that way.
No, it's all based upon size. Not the way it goes.
So Steve, are you thinking like neighbors would be, like, have input of what would be done next to them? Or they would have the right to challenge, if that's the word I want to use, challenge what another person wants to do with their property?
Well, I think the zoning gives certain rights to the developer, but I think the neighbors always have rights as well that need protection. And we usually do that in things like air, water, noise, fires, ad infinitum roads. We tried to really take that seriously and take that into consideration. And under some of the limited use permits, that is going to be an administrative decision. It really doesn't afford neighbors a place to come unless they come to the county commissioners when it's all said and done. But they don't have a place to do that prior to that input, unless it's the neighborhood meeting, but that's under limited use permits, it won't be a neighborhood meeting. I'm just suggesting that as an ethic, we try to take into consideration the neighborhood rights, property rights, and kind of review this from that perspective again as we go through this.
I think you'll find, I mean, we spent hours and hours on the table 2B, trying to make sure that we weren't allowing uses that would adversely affect the neighborhood. Okay, we spent a lot of time on that. And so I encourage all you guys to go through that table 2B and spend some time on it, because it took us, we had 3-4 meetings on that table 2B alone. So,
Is it possible to get at least in my version, the table 2B doesn't show up as a red line, it doesn't show what has changed and what's stayed the
Is there a
same.
red line on the side, in your sidebar?
No. So I think that is maybe some of where it's hard to know what changed. and
So,
what stayed the
so like
same.
on here, Brittany, if you click on that red line, no, on the left,
Oh, I do see
now you see the strikeout.
Yeah, I see strikeouts in the rest of my document, just not in the table.
So if you open it as a DOCX, it won't show. If you open it directly from the email, it will show.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Hardy had a couple, I'm sorry.
Okay.
that's a,
Go to page 42, 43. That's table 2B.
So maybe we could just send the table out then, Kate? with the
Well, I guess,
strikeouts?
let me see if I can open it in a different way, like.
Yeah.
uh,
I have the same problem.
Okay.
Even if the DOCX converted to a Word document and it didn't transfer over, but only if you open it directly from the email.
Right, that's fine.
But you can't copy and paste that.
If you, also, if you go into review and hit all markup, and do it quickly, rather than simple markup.
I'll work on that.
I see,
So that-
Steve, I misunderstood you, I meant the size of the zone, so I misunderstood you.
Yeah, they're, I mean, under intensive agriculture, they're all L except for the A's
With notice,
with notice.
But notice doesn't require public hearing, just notification.
that's correct. Unless, after that notice, the director could refer the matter to the planning commission and the board. If, say, the notice goes out to the adjacent property owners, and there's a lot of concern expressed, the director has the authority to then refer the matter, so where then it's processed like a conditional use. So that's still in here. Like the solar, that was a limited use. That could have been just approved administratively.
Right.
But based on the comments, the director at the time chose to refer it to your
Correctly.
planning commission and the board.
Yeah.
Hardy had something.
I had a couple questions for these fellers since we got them all in one room. There's a couple things that are really bothering me that's going on in this county right now. And one of them is, and I didn't know if you guys already touched on this or not, but this water district protection that's going on, you know, with like some of these water companies from the state. Is that something that you guys have any way in, or is that just through the state? Or you got any kind of say in that?
We have no say in it. What we have done though, is that's where we've added the language that wasn't in the code before, that if you have a water company, water district that is making it cost prohibitive for you to get water to your property, then you can apply for the variance to get the cistern. That's why we put that in there, because, you know, there's some of these companies out there that, I mean, if, it could cost you $150,000, $200,000 to get a water tap.
I have a real big problem with what's going on because these water companies are just, you know, they've got a free range. I mean, they're making some of these people bring a foot of water and trading them for a trickle. And what are they doing with all these feet of water? You're drying up this country, and that's the biggest problem in the 50s, 60s that happened to this country, is drying up this water. I think that I would love to be set in your spot to go after some of this stuff, and I wish you would, because if this goes on for another 10 years, they're not just asking to bring what we're gonna give you back, you know, we're close. They're asking 8 times that. What are they doing with that water? And we're all about agriculture, and we're not even thinking about, well, if I wanna build a house, I'm gonna go out and get Johnny Joe Farmer over here and buy an acre foot of his water, give it to this water company, pay him 14 grand, then pay him the rest of my life. They're gonna give me a trickle back, and where's the rest of the water go? That water's not going on this farm ground anymore. It's going somewhere, and that's a big, big problem I see, and I just wanted to touch on it.
That's an authority that we do not have.
So,
Because at that point, that is a contract, a personal contract between property owner and the water company. That is not,
But I
that is not
can't,
something.
if I'm in that water district, which is huge, you don't have a personal opinion, you don't have an option. It's like, do it or not.
That's why we changed that ruling, to make it easier for somebody to not have to do it, because because those practices are predatory with how much water they're taking. And-
Predatory, for
I mean,
sure.
there's a reason, you know, 50 years ago, from the edge of Corey Bench clear past Cedar Edge, it was nothing but fruit trees.
Yeah, and now
You
it's
know?
dried up.
Now it's dried up and it's housetops, because they forced that water to go when they put in the water system. And now
It's modern day thievery at best.
But, you know, and that's why we changed that part of the code to make that possible.
Which part are you referring to that you changed?
We put some hardship
Oh,
clauses.
the
Yes,
cisterns.
yes.
But aren't you,
Yeah, but
at the opposite point, sorry, go ahead, promoting that with unlimited residential uses on,
No, we're basically what we're doing is we're protecting that lot that existing lot. Okay, you know, if Joe Blow developer wants to develop a bunch of land that doesn't have any water, we're not gonna allow that. But if he has 5 acres he wants to build a house on, but he can't get a water tap to, we're not gonna make that a condemned lot without any water. So,
I guess what I was looking at is the density. So, you know, right now, the code reads that there, I think it's on page 55. You can build unlimited structures as long as you have adequate water to do so under rural residential general requirements density. And so, this is a big question. I don't mean to step on your toes, but it's following along.
What's
The
the
total
section number?
Section B, general requirements, section B1B. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, page 55. And page 58. Okay, mine says 55 on the bottom.
It's different on the printed copy and the online copy.
Section 4B1B, density.
okay.
Total number of residential uses allowed by parcel shall be limited, let's see. However, additional residences may be allowed with no restriction, it seems, provided it's proof of water. So doesn't that promote everything that goes against the master plan and protection of ag? Wouldn't this promote open season for?
And because it specifically says in here that there's no significant impact to irrigated ag ground.
Yeah, but up in our country, it's all deeded water. I mean, it's not tied to the ground. So, I mean, it's like selling your car. So, I mean, the more this goes away and goes away and goes away, the more we're gonna dry that country up. And, I mean,
Well,
it's crazy.
right, no significant impact to irrigated ag ground in what sense, right? If we're removing water for a residence and we're putting the residence on non-irrigated ag ground,
It's
we're
coming
still
off
taking the
somewhere.
water off the ag
Yeah,
ground.
it ain't on that field over there and across the valley anymore. It's over here. And they've got it and they're giving us a 10th.
And then what,
And once again, you're preaching to the choir, but you're talking about
But I'm
authorities
just-
that the Board of Commissioners doesn't have.
That's
So
government
who would a
owned.
guy like me,
Well,
We gotta be careful.
density restrictions,
Then you're gonna have to go to the state legislature and have to change state statutes.
but density restrictions, you do have power over. And this relates to, you know, we've seen multiple projects come through or subdivisions that have come through here where a family has built 5 residences on, and now everybody's passed away, and the brother's gotta sell everything off, so he needs to subdivide it, and now it's a cluster subdivision that never went through any type of subdivision standards. And we've seen that happen, but this is promoting that by saying, as long as you have water, go buy, you know, you can buy a 40-acre parcel, you got your water shares, you trade it to the water company for your residences, and you can build as many residences, well, 40 of them, minus the roads. It seems like it's going against the master plan as far as protection of ag is concerned. I mean,
Tell you what I'd ask is, take that section and rewrite it. Kick it around as a PC, kick it around, rewrite it, let's take a look at it.
Yeah, that's one of my, I think that's one thing that I would take a look at, sure.
Yeah.
The other part of my question was a 2-part deal here. I see where Tate's coming from. I'm not standing directly with him because of this other part of this question. You guys have an intergovernmental agreement that I think needs to be reworked significantly. I think that you have municipalities that aren't even interested in working with people. Therefore, people, any in that UGA or these prime places that's at an ag ground that's to develop, they got them, if you will, bent over the barrel, and there's nowhere to go. So have you guys done anything with the intergovernmental agreements,
That's-
working them over or anything like that?
That's part of our, once again, that's part of the process. We wanted to get to this process where we had a code ready to go, so we could go to the municipalities with an IGA, because, yeah, that is,
So one of the key ways I see to preserve ag ground and keep people from trying to build houses and subdivisions out in the dingleweeds and these cornfields is to make it easier for people to develop around these places, and it's real hard right now. It's like, nobody's gonna go in there and build 5 houses and put in $400,000 worth of streets for them. I mean, that's why Delta County, if you didn't notice, is lacking in housing and development substantially to our community, our surrounding community. So I think that these two things are a combination, are what's really hindering and causing some of these subdivisions, because they're gonna go no matter what, but they're just gonna go in spots that probably they shouldn't be, and a lot of fighting.
So how do you square that with the concept of development pays its own way?
Well, I mean,
Because we've heard that too.
That's what they say, development pays their own way. But some of these places that are actually doing this and doing it right, that's not the way they're not just walking in there, development pays their own way. They're like, if you're gonna bring this much to the table, we're gonna chip in and help, we're gonna do something, we're at least not gonna hinder you, or at least make it where it's not, when it doesn't pencil out.
But we don't have any jurisdiction over the municipality.
With this IGA you do. You have an intergovernmental agreement that can be easy, you can be where you worked at.
but the IGA doesn't affect anything inside the municipal boundaries. It's basically, I mean, we have no say-so what goes on inside the municipal boundaries. What these IGAs are certain properties outside of the municipal boundary that they are thinking that they want to annex in the future.
Therefore, the first thing you have to do is go say, hey, do you want to annex it in the future? And what do they say?
Well,
Yeah,
that's
that's
the
the
problem,
negotiation.
There you go.
and that's
So
why
now-
we're taking that to them.
And when they go over there and you say, all right, we want to now do all this, and the guy says, huh, I'm out of here.
And that's part of the issue. I mean, it's
There's a-
taxation without representation to a point,
You got it.
if you're not careful with that, so.
I just
So, yeah,
think
we're
that
gonna
Delta
have
County should
those
protect,
discussions, yeah.
you know, a little bit more of what
And
municipalities are
to
doing.
touch base on the housing thing, I mean, affordable housing, lack of housing in this county, you know, within unincorporated Delta County is not where you're gonna find it. Because to make affordable housing really work, it's gotta be dense. You gotta have sewer, you gotta have water that can maintain that type of housing. So looking for affordable housing in unincorporated Delta County is not really,
But you have addressed that with the 1 acre and 2.5 acres.
Yes.
I mean,
we're trying.
that's a density, lowering of density, which
Right,
is
right.
linked to that policy.
Right.
So
And
congratulations.
Do you think that has anything to do with the lack of the municipalities trying to do something? If they're gonna expand, you gotta get into the county, right?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that.
So when they don't expand, there we go, let's head out on any, you know, Mesa or whatever and start buying water up, getting rid of ag ground, and building, we call it 3, 4, 5 house subdivisions over and over and over again and scatter them all over, which, that's not the way that I would assume anything could grow for density, so.
But then you gotta balance that with what Mr. Schrock was saying about personal property rights.
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand.
So I'll echo what Tate was saying. I have same concerns with regard to the language about the additional residents tied to water. By the way, there's a typo in there as well. There is no significant impact to irrigated if you're gonna keep this. And I think the challenge to the PC to look at this and either rewrite it or come up with something is a worthy challenge. That's what I want to get together about, because it addresses a lot of issues. I side with the people that feel like it is counterintuitive to the master plan about preserving agriculture, because if I had 40 shares and I had 40 acres and I'm zone A35, I can put 40 homes on if I trade that water for taps. And I feel like some of this code is sort of putting what I would call the cart before the horse. If people build homes, which we've seen before, they're gonna build homes and then come to subdivide. That's sort of counterintuitive to land planning. It's reactive to the land use code. And the whole land use code is supposed to be proactive and try to have some type of semblance of development that's consistent through the whole thing. And I think there are things in here that are counterintuitive to that. And I guess if I have the floor, I have one more thing, and I have concerns. I think you guys have done a good job, don't get me wrong. There's a couple things here. I think we need to make clear, Carl doesn't work as the head of planning. I don't think that was stated here. We right now don't have a director of planning, is that, and I have concerns about passing a land use code without a director, or having any input with no director. I know there's, been an announcement for the position, but I think you need to take that into consideration before we put us in a time frame that requires this passing, and then, somebody who's gonna lead this whole thing really has no say in it. I think it's gonna be a critical time. My other concern is, and I just wanted to point that out, I think people here have seen Carl make this presentation for the last 2 or 3 years, and he did a great job tonight, like he always does, but he did it from a different position. He's not the director anymore. He's moved on, so we don't have a director. I just want to make sure people understand that, I think that was clear. My other concern is I go to I look at the master plan, I go to the definitions in our land use code, and I'm gonna read it because I think it's important. The 835 has been reworded, and it states, this zoning district is intended to reflect lands with significant natural resources, including prime agricultural lands. The intent is to retain irrigated lands on larger parcels that are generally 35 or more acres. It allows for the broadest range of agricultural and supporting uses. I'm assuming supporting meaning supporting agriculture. And essentially 820 says the same thing. The zoning district is intended for small-scale agriculture, rural residential uses on parcels of land that are generally 20 acres or more. Broad range of agriculture and supporting uses, as well as large lot residential. A5 says the same thing. The zoning district is intended for small-scale agriculture and large lot residential. That is very much in keeping with the master plan, which I think had a very broad support in the county. My concern comes when we get to 2B. 2B sort of obliterates it. 2B automatically allows, with a lot of L's, commercial, industrial, and non-agricultural uses in these zones with no hearings, sometimes no notice. These are changed of uses. If I come in and buy an A5 piece and I know everybody around me is A5, I really anticipate, I expect the land use code to keep that character. If somebody comes in and puts mini storage and changes it from what is essentially an ag residential use to a commercial use with no hearing, no notice, I think our land use code is failing. I know there's a big demand to try not to allow private property rights. We have a history of that. I mean, our whole history is promoting private property rights, and there are people who would wish the land use code would go away. I think if anything they get out of these meetings, that the land use code is not going away, we're gonna have it. But to make it workable, I think we have to make it safe and fair and equitable, as in Steve's comment, to not only the property right owners, but everybody else around them as well. And I think we're leaning a little bit towards ignoring the adjacent property owners. The N is sort of a notice. It doesn't really require any type of hearing. And I think it allows the administrative approval of things. And that means that the planning department is representing the neighbors. And I think they're falling short in terms of all the concerns that neighbors may have. So I guess I would like to go back to be with our planning commission and look at it again and make sure that we're comfortable. I think conditional doesn't mean denial. I think conditional means it needs to be discussed. So when we get into rural industry, whether it's small, medium, or large, or whether it's an ag feeding, which all, Steve was right, it's all listed as L. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that's going to create problems. I think if you're changing use, although ag is supported here, so I have a conflict in that. But when we have non-ag uses that are commercial, whether they're more retail, somehow we're sort of lumping these commercial and somewhat industrial uses as home businesses. And I'm all for home businesses, but when when it changes the character of the neighborhood, which is happening right around me, with no input from the neighbors, I think our land use code has failed. And I want to discuss that at the PC level, and it may come back with other recommendations to change some of your Ls, which is administrative. I'm not comfortable with the planning department representing neighbors without neighbor input, and that's what's going on. So they're coming up with criteria, they're doing their best job, I'm not saying they're very confident, but they do miss things. In the, the mini warehouse thing, typical mini warehouses have Saturday garage sales, and they're a nightmare. People all over the place, they open the doors and they have just auctions and sales, and that's a real burden on neighbors. And I don't think that was considered in this thing. Lighting, certainly they're trying to keep the down lighting, but why do they need to be lit at night at all? Some aren't at all. Things like that. I think the neighbors had some good comments. It got discussed at the Board of Adjustments. It did not get appealed because I think the general consensus is the neighbors felt they weren't going to get heard. And I think that's sort of, I'm afraid the land use code may be leaning that way. I think if we lean towards neighbors not feeling that they're going to have a legitimate, fair shot of discussing something, not denying it. There's always that concern that I don't want to turn my right to do something over to my neighbor. That's not what we have, my years on it, I don't remember we've denied anything, or anything that we've denied has to come back and been approved. So I think it's a mischaracterization to say I'm turning my rights over to someone else. I just think it's planning requires, I've always said, land use planning is all about neighbors. And we have taken away that neighborhood input in this plan.
TK, when you and your planning commission start talking about that, I'd ask you to keep a couple things in mind. One is, do you change the notification process in that? And also in our discussion, we are also trying to preserve and encourage agritourism type of things within ag parcels to make properties viable, make livelihoods viable. So
Agritourism
keep that in mind.
Falls within the definition of your 835. It's ag, but mini warehouses and retail that's not ag related are different uses. They're changing the character. I think we can
Keep that in mind as you guys go.
Absolutely, I think that's what the discussion is about. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar discussion as far as the home business is concerned with storage. The only limitation on home business and storage seems to be that it has to be screened from a public road, which doesn't, that could mean a bunch of things, but basically that opens home, a lot of businesses could be considered outdoor storage, junkyards or rehabbing old mobile homes or whatever, right? There's a lot of, I think that opens this thing up right into that junk ordinance issue, or even the storage issue, mini storage, like the thing that TK is talking about, with the lack of, I think I have the same concerns about lack of public hearing options, and we're putting too much faith in the planning director, especially since there isn't one right now, and there will be other times in the future there won't be one, to properly declare that we should take a notice from a notice to a hearing, because I think going back prior to the land use code, when we had the special development process, the planning commission meetings were always about the neighborly concerns and addressing the neighborly concerns. And if the neighbors don't have an opportunity to hear their concerns addressed, then I think they have some property rights that are not being, listened to potentially. So I think we should address that when we
Please do. We'd like to see that. We really would. Victoria?
I think that when we're discussing private property rights, I believe a lot of places in this country, there aren't very strong private property rights anymore. And living here, we've enjoyed strong private property rights for generations. And if you want to live in a place where your neighbors are controlled and there's a set list of things that they can and can't do, you can choose to live in a place like that. I think living out in the country where we live and in the county, we should be able to do as much as we possibly can without affecting them in detrimental ways to their lives. You know, there might be inconveniences that come from people's livelihood choices. That's not in our power. We can't dictate what people do with their lives. If they want to have a mechanic, if they want to fix cars in the garage and call it a home business, I don't think we should be limiting them on any standards for what they can fix in their garage. That's their garage for the house they paid for, on the property that they paid for and own in most cases. I think that a lot of this is very strict on property owners, considering the fact that it should be out of the good of our hearts that we're considering our neighbors and the way that our property use is affecting them, and not required. Because if you want a required set of standards that everyone is gonna abide by, go live in a subdivision, go live in a city, go live in city limits. You know, this is one of the last places in Colorado where we have our private property rights to the extent that we do. And that's my take on that. I think that the neighbor's input is important. I think that we should always hear public input, and we should be listening, and that we should be limiting things that hurt people's health, that make, you know, extreme inconveniences for their sleeping and stuff like that. But if my neighbor has 6 dogs, my neighbor has 13, you know, that's none of my business. I think that a lot of this is just too strict when it doesn't need to be, because if the neighbor has a problem, that is what the court system is for. Neighbor disputes, take them to court, and guess what? You're probably gonna lose because they have private property rights to do what they want. But with a code like this, you're making it so that we have limited private property rights and that people can take actions that are just somewhat ungrounded, in my opinion. And that's what I have to say about private property rights and limiting uses just because the neighbors are not happy with a garage sale.
There's private property, you know, both ways, though, you know, I mean, you gotta protect people that are already here and established and have spent their livelihood building something versus coming in and wanting to, you know, both have private property rights. It's kind of where they're trying to split the.
I just think it's, where we should be splitting it is when it is actually affecting their life and their liberty, and.
It's too late then, though. I mean, what do you do? All right, you're doing it now, move her out, bud. See, so they're trying to, like, before this happens, have public comment, you know, let people, when someone new, because obviously it's gonna be someone new moving in, next to someone that's been there. So this guy has rights, but the guys that are moving in have rights too. So I think it's gotta be discussed up front.
But we would like the planning commission
Yeah.
to help us with that, because we struggled and we had long discussions on where we come with this, where we come down with this.
It's the ultimate question about this whole thing.
I'd like to hear kind of, yeah, like Steve was saying, kind of a little bit higher up, you know, we all heard the public comment from the last draft, and like, in making these decisions, in reviewing Table 2B, in thinking about these bigger issues, where were you landing? What public comment really was landing for you that made you make some changes? What, you know, I think the insight on the water cisterns was really helpful, because I wasn't, I guess, you know, thinking or as aware of those issues, and that's why that went back in there, or, you know, went in there. So can you
I
kind
can
of
give you
take
the
a
two
step
things
back?
that struck out to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One is personal responsibility. We in going through this, we had a lot of discussion on it's the landowner's personal responsibility to make sure that they comply with this. We shouldn't be forcing these things down on them. So that's why Table 2B got changed the way it did. Second is make it more readable, make this a more efficient, easier code to go through. And the planning department spent a lot of time doing that.
And I'll tell you, the way I reviewed this, anybody, I've got a file, I don't know how many megs this file is, but everybody that emailed me and gave me substantive comments, like chapter verse of what needed to be done different. I kept that. I've got 4 of these things with sticky notes all over them. You know, in those public comment periods, we had a lot of platitudes. We had a lot of people that just wanted to say how angry they were at us, but they didn't have any substantive comments to the code itself. But anybody that came to me with substantive comments, I reviewed every single one of those. So, you know, and some I felt changed, some needed change, some I didn't. But, you know, to Victoria's point to the home business and brought up by Tate, you know, in chapter 2, F1 through 4, maybe there should be a 5 on it, so page 3 is added. But anyways, there is, we tried to label out that home business and tried to make it as concise as possible and still hit everything that we could, just to avoid that, we talk about, noxious fumes, we talk about noises, odors, dust, traffic. These are the types of things like that we talked about that, we want everybody to be able to enjoy entrepreneurship, but, it still has to be done safely for the neighborhood. And I think what we did there is got as close as we could, protecting people from unsafe things and still giving people the right to do what they want with their property. So.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty good, and the storage was quite vague, which sticks out to me, because that can mean a lot of different, storage as part of the business can take an effect, and if it starts generating a lot of traffic, who's paying for the road to get maintained, those
Yeah,
types
but,
of things.
that's the other challenge, though, is that, is that storage, when it reaches that level, is it truly a secondary use of the,
Well, that's what
it should be secondary use of the property.
we've
Home should be
wrestled
the
with
first.
that all along, too. That's the hard question to answer.
So did we.
Yeah.
It's just like, are these places addressing some of the ADA stuff, and there's gotta be a line there, a threshold. I don't know how you put that line there, but, when you go to, like, people are coming here and, they're opening their own stuff up for a lawsuit if they're not in compliance with any of this stuff. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, if you're a small business, I don't know how you draw that line, but I think it needs to be drawn, because if not.
But that's also what Widow said, that's the personal responsibility.
But some people will push that, and then we're over here, and like I said, these court systems, we don't want them just packed full, and that's where we're headed, so.
Okay, it's the balance between entrepreneurship and personal responsibility.
Right. You don't want to penalize success, right? When your home business becomes very successful, you don't want to penalize that by deeming it commercial and putting new requirements on it. But when it's impacting the neighbors who also have property rights, that's the hard line to find.
Or penalize existing businesses that are doing it commercial and paying and taking all the precautions, and then here we go, boom, undercut them.
I would encourage you guys to pick that topic up and beat it up, see where you end up. We'd like to hear from you.
I was just gonna say that, in a civil society, there has to be some sort of order and rules for a civil society to run. And my idea of personal responsibility is totally different than your idea of personal responsibility. Therefore, civil rules that protect both sides, as lenient as you can make them, but there still has to be a boundary in which we all agree to. And if we can't agree to that boundary, then one of us has to move on. And I think that's how we have to operate in civil societies. It's not the wild, wild west anymore.
And go back to Victoria's comment also about.
Break for 5 minutes.
You guys want to take a quick break? Let's take 5, come back here at 5 too.
Thank you.
We are gonna, at 7:15, we're going to kind of wrap up the Q&A part, go to next steps. So let's be prepared for that.
Did we hear from anyone who hasn't spoken for Mr. Morales? Do you have anything to add?
I can just echo what everybody else has been saying. I think the commissioner's done a good job trying to summarize everything. We still got work to do on some particular items. Before we have another joint meeting,
questions as far as, you know, the commissioner's intent behind some of the language they use, not necessarily trying to change the language, but is there anything you can think of to ask these guys while they're here, why they chose what they chose, or something stands out to you? I did have I'll kick it off. I had a question regarding the difference between single-family detached and additional residence. Where is that delineation, and how do we define the two?
You know, single family detached, you have a house, you have another house. You have two detached, single family homes on the property. Their own utilities, their own, you know, septic.
Address.
And ultimately, they can be subdivided separately.
They could,
Right.
right.
ADU.
They don't have to be.
Well, we have I think what's in here is the ADU can't.
Correct.
Correct. The ADU is connected to the main house, so the ADU is connected to the same septic, the same water. Now, some water purveyors may have a different way of looking at that, but from a land use code perspective, you can add an ADU connected to the water, connected to the septic.
But the single-family residence could be unlimited if they have the water.
Under the additional residences, yes, limited use. They have to meet all the requirements, correct, yeah.
You said it would be better?
Setbacks,
Septic,
access.
setbacks, access, address.
Well, you wouldn't, if I wanted to build a second home on my place and I have water for it, and I have an access off of the county road, I don't need a new access.
You need an address.
I need an address, but I can
And,
get an
and
address because they'll
and
put.
when you go for your address application, if that access is inadequate for two residents, then that's what that would be.
Right. Right, but if it's adequate, I can get as many addresses for an access if it's adequate. Right? You're saying no?
More than three, isn't it?
Well, then you get into the address regulations, that if there's more than three, they may require a road name.
Okay, so are we gonna be taking that into consideration in how we evaluate this? Because that sort of impacts the question about residences and.
That's the point behind this, is just because it's allowed doesn't mean you can't do it illegally. So, you know, if Tom K wants to put 20 houses on his 20-acre lot, then yeah, Tom K can do that, provided he can meet the setbacks, have the water, have the addresses. If he has to put in a road to meet standards because he's added all these addresses, Tom's gonna have to do that. It's technically, you know, the cost falls back on you as the person that wants to build these homes. That's why, to me, this whole conversation is kind of blown out of proportion a little bit, because, you know, you're not gonna see this. I mean, and if you do, it's gonna be very rare that people are gonna put 40 homes on a 40-acre lot without subdividing. Because, number one, there's no money in it. Number two, it's gonna be just as expensive as if they subdivided in the long run anyway.
Because you can't sell it.
Well,
And you can't
I
sell
guess the
it.
question is,
You could.
we don't have a building code, which I'm fully support. So I don't know that I have to go to anybody to build a house.
You still have to get,
I don't have to ask anybody's permission, yet this is saying you've gotta do the following, you've gotta meet the following setbacks, but yet I'm not required to ask anybody to build a home. So that, to me, they're not lining up. Meaning I can
You
go
still
back-
have to get a septic permit, you still have to get electrical plumbing,
That's
you
all.
still have to get an address permit.
But I don't go to
And
you
if-
for a septic or electric. I go to some other entity that will give it to me. DMEA doesn't.
For septic, you do come to the county. So yes, you
Access,
still,
you come to the county, address, you come to the county, septic, you come to the county, and theoretically, a site plan review, you come to the county.
Well, yes, but I'm saying you don't have to go to get all that done to build another residence.
Is your concern that people are gonna do it without following those requirements because they are not,
They don't have to.
that no one's looking over their
Well,
shoulders?
They don't have to. We don't have any building codes. So there's nothing, there's no permit for a home.
and
I can
that's
build
why
on-
we have language in here for unlawful uses also.
Thanks, good question.
I guess that's why I want the discussion at the PC level, because I think we'll ferret it out. I think I've got concerns, I'm not quite sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Just real quick, I got two questions that just concern the Board of Adjustment, because when you guys make up your rules,
When they come to us, that's our playbook. One of the things that's wrong with the playbook, or hard to maintain from meeting to meeting, treating everybody the same, is the hardship. So Carl said there are gonna be standards around hardship. Love to see what that's gonna be about. And we don't have to go into that right now, but if you can give us some definition on that, then we can play by the same set of guidelines. The other thing is multiple homes that come before the Board of Adjustment. And over time, if a person builds, I think the first one that came to us was 5 homes up in Surface Creek on relatively small chunk of ground, had ag ground adjoining it. But we were in charge of making a decision whether we wanted to, we could deny it and let a judge subdivide the property. And to my knowledge, the only person in Colorado that can do that is if you go to court, a judge can divvy up property. And if you let a judge divvy up 5, 6, 7, 8 homes on a piece of property, then the county has no input. So we just have to butch up, let's mitigate this and see what the best way, in the neighbor's view, the county's view, whatever, how are we gonna separate these 5 lots and still keep the rest of it? Because they have an easy out. Just go to court. I don't know if that's gonna
I
change in
think
the
that's
near
what
future or
Tom
not,
is-
but that's, when that comes to us, they're asking for a variance. And whatever the new set of rules is, and I'm glad we're adjusting this new set of rules. But whatever that is, that's kind of what we have to make our decision on. A lot of our decisions are based on 4 items when they come through the Board of Adjustment. It's gotta meet 4 criteria on one chapter and I think 3 on the other, but, am I speaking right there?
Yeah.
I think that's, so, those 2 items, I'd really like to have you guys review that, or you guys, if you're gonna make that adjustment. Those are 2 key things that we look at, and if you keep that in mind and maybe modify that so it works for everybody.
Mike, is it usually economic hardship?
It's a complete gray area. It's so gray it looks like midnight. You can come up with that whatever you want.
But is that usually the approach of the applicant? They're looking for an economic hardship claim?
I think the best ones that we've heard are a son, a grandson wanting to come back and build a home, can't afford to go somewhere and buy a store-bought piece of property with a house on it, so to speak. Those are usually the ones we look at. You get some that, we just had one come through for, they don't live there, they live out of state, they wanted to subdivide the property. There was no hardship, they just simply wanted to do it to make money. And that we look at that a whole lot differently, or I do anyway, on the panel, so. You never know what you're gonna get. You get 2 extremes.
Yeah.
And you get a whole bunch of stuff in between, but there's no guidance. There's nothing for us to look at. And we don't need to be a little dictatorship and say, well, you have to prove to us that it's a hardship. They come in, they plead their case, the planning department goes through the whole file, tells us what we need to know, and we're supposed to make a decision on it.
Yeah, I think that language was a problem going back to 2021.
And maybe it's you guys that I should be asking for that, and then you can present it to these guys. I think it's the right way.
And I noticed in our definitions, we do not define hard.
Coming through without. See, what's your thought process on that?
So, I'll maybe start it off in that, really, there's not much change to what was done in 2021, and the discussion at the board was, there was a lot of discussion about that at the time the land use code was done, so that's why they went back to the way it was in 2021, other than where it was a permitted use, changing it to an allowed use for a small animal feeding operation, A35 and A20. If you want to add anything to that, that was what I remember from the conversation.
We didn't want to restrict somebody feeding 50 cows out, you know, and calling it, and having a neighbor calling it a CAFO.
Sure.
But there hasn't been significant change because it's not redlined with the exception
Yeah,
from the
I guess
drilling.
I've had a hard time following that part.
I think the issue is, maybe we didn't realize that under the limited use permit, it was an administrative decision, potentially only, without it coming to the plan commission.
But isn't the change that it's noticed but no longer required for hearing unless director?
Yeah, the director can elevate it to that level
Right.
if needed, and I personally, I think that's the way, because none of these two are ever the same, you know, it's always a different set of neighbors, different neighborhood, different demographics, so I think it needs to be the decision of the director, you know, and then how many times do we actually gain anything by having two more boards review it, you know, or are we mucking up the water sometimes by bringing in that process?
Yeah,
So,
Sure, and I was mostly focused on the 1,000+ animal units, you know.
and once again, I think the director reaches that point that, you know, that's gonna be something that's probably before the board, but, you know, there's plenty of properties out there that can bring in that 1,000+ units and not affect neighbors, or can work with neighbors and make it happen, that it doesn't need to go further.
Sure, but of course, it's been contentious in the past.
Price of beef might be happening soon.
And there are standards that were developed, which was
Yes.
a major
Sure.
part of the 2021.
We did put a lot of discretion with the planning director, and that does a couple of things for us. One, it speeds up these reviews. One of the biggest complaints we have is how long it takes, to get something through planning. And if it's something simple as taking 50 cows into wherever, does it really need to take a month or 6 weeks to get that done?
Yeah, I
But
agree with that.
the problem is, it's not 6 weeks, because by the time you have
6
notice,
months.
Yeah.
by the time you have notice, you give time for hearing, and then time for the next board, you know, minimum of 3 months at least.
Sure.
You bet.
So that's the intent of that.
Sure.
Of
Yeah, and I hear you.
empowering our director to use good sense, common sense, good judgment.
Sure.
Two of our members were on that CAFO working group, and maybe we could ask their opinions about this.
Please do.
Going forward.
I had a question about, in the intensive agriculture section, about the type of odor management plans that are necessary. And so this applies to small, medium, and large, correct? All
What
the-
chapter verse are you at?
I'm on chapter 2, section 4,
What page?
page 55.
53.
Bottom of page 54.
Or 55 is
10
really where I'm gonna be discussing.
The odor management plans,
Yes,
okay?
I'm in, part C of section 4, I think, right now, it's on page 55. So, I didn't really know, so I went through, part 1, and when you get down to B of 1C, it talks about manure collection, storage, and treatment systems, including, anaerobic process wastewater vessels and impoundments, and aerobic impoundments. So I didn't know what those were, and so I Googled them and I looked into what it takes to install those. And what I was finding is they're anywhere from $400,000 to $5 million. They're typically $1.2 million to install for the average person that installs them. And so if we're talking about 35 dairy cows here, and this is a requirement of approval,
That's great.
That seems like a bit extreme for 35 cows to have to install a $400,000 to $5 million wastewater treatment system.
So if we change that to from a shall to a may include,
Well, it says if
Or in-
applicable.
Including
In
but
fact, where
not
does it-
limited to.
It's on small, middle, and large. Can you like go to like large only?
That's what I was gonna suggest for this entire section,
Why
on
wouldn't
odor
we? I mean,
control,
that makes
dust
sense.
control,
I
quality.
mean, I don't think small and medium should be in that. I don't think it's in small and round.
Take a stab at it.
yeah, that's a good catch. We can turn that to a may or an if applicable
Yeah.
to cover that, so.
And that's really what I've been trying to do.
Now,
is
remember
take-
though, for swine and for the large, it comes from the state. That is
That's right.
not dictated by the county, so.
That's kind of my thought
it's-
process, is a lot of
we've got
this
it-
should probably only be for large, because when we're talking about small and medium, it's just so unnecessary and unfeasible for these people that are, you know, if you have a small animal feeding operation, you're not someone rich, you're not able to put in this system, as well as all the costs associated with the water quality plan, the dust management plan, the noise mitigation plan. I mean, all these plans cost money that falls on the applicant, and for 35 dairy cows. You know, that is just a little bit extreme, and so, as I was gonna say, what I've been trying to do is just look at the real-life implementation of some of these areas and how unrealistic it is for our population. I mean, 12% of Delta County lives in poverty, and the rest, our medium income is 35,000. These are not rich people we're talking about, and these are very extensive requirements for simple operations.
I just wanna
But-
step back and see if this is actually saying what it's
Yeah.
saying. I think this is saying that if
Yeah.
the farm has these systems, they need to be mapped and recorded in the odor management plan, not that the odor
They're
management
required.
plan must
You gotta define it.
require that the farm has this.
That's what I would do.
So, but to back up to what you were saying there, Victoria, poverty does not give you the right to do something illegal or incorrectly, okay? So, you know, we have to deal with this regularly. You know, people come to us with a hardship case, they are making money, there's still no excuse for doing it wrong, okay? So, I understand where you're going, but I think there's ways to reword this to where it's not required for every application. But, you know, just because you're poor doesn't mean you get to do it illegally, so.
Yeah, as long as like the neighbor doesn't come in and be like, hey, reads this, and tries to cause trouble for someone that's got 40 dairy cows, and comes to you and says, hey, do this. That's where I see the problem. Like you say, it doesn't have to happen, but you know, and I know that's what goes on. The neighbors rat everybody off, and it's either they're fighting all the time, and when they got something that can back them up like this, without a may or something like that in there, it could get dicey there.
And I think that Don, a may opens it up for discussion.
Yeah.
Remedy, solutions, those are the words we should be working towards, instead of Hatfield McCoy kind of a thing. I think soft, you know, usually the word may, because each situation could be a little different.
Because you may find an application on a small parcel with 40 dairy cows that they have to put in a system like this because of groundwater situations or
That's
something
right.
like that, so
And you
there's
can't,
no.
you
yeah.
can't claim poverty and say, well, you know, I really can't afford it. Your actions are gonna create.
Sorry, I contaminated the entire stream
That's
system
right.
down below me, but.
That's right.
Yeah.
Situational awareness,
There you go.
you know, if they were gonna put something like that out in Peach Valley where it's drier and all get out anyway, it really wouldn't affect the groundwater. You try to put it next to a flowing stream or a couple of irrigation ditches, whole different story.
And that's why these are limited and require the review.
Mhm. Well, and again, some of them are requirements of the state. That's correct, so. Okay.
And real quick while we're on this, on page 51, section 4A3, it says minimum lot area for a medium or large use is 35 acres, but the table represents medium use can be allowed in all acreages except for the R1, it's not, there's either a TECO or incompatibility.
Well, you could be in a A5 zone, but have a 50-acre lot for some reason due to zoning map not matching up.
So it's still, so you have to have, for a 35-acre, for medium animal feeder operation, the minimum zone, minimum lot size is 35 acres.
Right.
In any zone. Got it. Right. Okay.
So we're at about quarter after here. You're gonna get us back to next steps here. I'm hearing, Jacob, that your team here would like to do some, at least one, if not more meetings.
Yeah. I think we may have better discussion if we can just come to the table ourselves.
Yeah, you intimidate
And,
But have you been
It's easier to call us by
intimidated?
name when we're not here, is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Because our next meeting is set for the 23rd anyway, our normal planning meeting. Be nice to have that meeting.
Okay, first question is, do you guys want to do this again with the commissioners next week? We certainly don't have to. We just wanted to
I
make
think
ourselves
it's more
available.
productive for everybody if we came with things we've been talking about to you on one platform, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we could meet maybe on the 23rd and then reschedule a joint session would be, I think would be pretty cool.
You gotta get a game plan.
Otherwise, we're all over the place.
We may still all be all over the place, but
It'll be on
Okay,
paper.
after your work sessions are
Uh-huh.
two, please let us know if you want to come back together as a group like
Yes.
this, or
I would like that.
or you want to do it, just give us a draft of what you have come up with.
And this is helpful.
I think we do the same thing, just reverse. We'll have, if it's okay, we'll have Carl go over our highlights, and we can discuss if you guys like it or not.
That works.
Yeah,
That's a good
that'd be
idea.
great.
He's a good representative.
Special projects.
Well, in keeping in mind why we have land use codes to begin with, because neighbors can't get along, we didn't want 6 years ago, the state come to Delta County and say, you don't have any land use codes, we're gonna make them for you. And so that's kind of what prompted us to start this. We see, not on a daily basis, but a lot of times, poor planning from the 1970s is coming back and biting us in the butt. We've got one parcel just down the road here that is I think it's 0.14 acres, and the septic system has failed. And then there's a subdivision going up to Eckerd that was started in the late 60s, early 70s, and those lots are on less than an acre. Those septic systems are starting to fail. And if we can avert some of those problems to where down the road it doesn't come, because I'm sure when they put the septic system in, this will be good for 50 years. Well, it's 50 years now and they're failing. And same way with Tri-County's water system, they put a 4-inch line in, this will be good for 50 years. Well, now it's 50 years, we need a 6-inch water line, and they're replacing it on their budget as much as they can. But keep in mind, that's why we have land use codes, to try to avert some of these problems, to where we saw one lot the other day. I think it was in Board of Equalization meeting. There was a nice lot, nice house, came up, and then a narrow strip all the way down. How in the world did it get subdivided
It was the
like
perfect
that?
flagpole lot. If you ever wanted to see your quintessential flagpole lot, I mean, that was it, so.
And so that's why we have things like this, to try to avert that, so that.
Well, and to make matters worse, I know the governor's office is already working on another bill this year, since the last one failed, to try to change land use codes throughout the state, so.
Just as sort of a final comment to you guys, I know you turned down our recommendations, some of which came from you on the amendments, but at least you did not repeal the land use code. And congratulations on that. That would have been a travesty
We agree.
and chaotic.
There was never an intention of repealing the land use code. We have a faction of the county out there that really wants anarchy.
Yeah.
Anarchy is never successful, so We need to fix what we've got and make it work. So-
Yeah, I should say something. At a hearing, Board of Adjustments, we had I would call it a significant group of residents get up and address the Board of Adjustments, actually praising that we have a land use code. Of course, I wanted to ask them where you guys been for the last year, but they actually spoke to the fact that they were very, very glad there was a land use code that allowed them to speak in a forum and specific. So it's a side that I don't think we hear enough from. I think the anti-land use code sort of goes sometimes with Delta County, and it's very local, but it isn't necessarily represent everybody. And I was glad to see enough people stand up and say this is a valuable asset. Land use codes are about values, and you know, if you really want to have unlimited private property rights, they intersect or conflict with land use codes. They don't go together. So at one point, you got to give up on something, and I think we're doing the right thing. You guys have done a good job. I also think you realized how long it took us 9 months. You guys are still doing it after 6 months. It's not an easy task.
I would just plug for kind of in those next steps, thinking about, you know, obviously these are all before we actually have a draft or anything passed, but one thing that I heard resounding from the public comments before was just like, I had no idea about this, and now I'm afraid that I'm gonna be enforced somehow. And especially if we're taking the track of it's public responsibility, it's personal responsibility, not to you don't have to come in and get your plans reviewed. Just really thinking about public information campaigns and education events to make sure at minimum all the builders know about these codes, at minimum realtors know about these codes, you know, in a deeper sense that seems to have happened with the last, you know, when it was originally passed. Because I think so much of what I heard was just either misinformation because people didn't know about it or didn't read it fully or were scared. And I just, very much encourage the county to think about how that's going to, you know, unfurl once it's passed.
No, and there's still a large percentage of the naysayers out there that think that prior to 2021, we had no land use codes at all. I mean, they don't even understand that we had them before that. So, and I've had that conversation with many people. So.
Carl, did you have anything for us here on the scheduling next steps?
Well, it sounds like we're moving to having planning commission work sessions. Is there a time frame around that, or until they get through it, or that would be my only question.
I don't want to rush planning commission. I want them to have the opportunity to take a good, close, careful look the same way we did.
Because the thing is
But I would encourage you guys to continue to move this forward.
We obviously, we don't really want to wait another 9 months, so.
But on the 23rd, we could actually dedicate that entire meeting, not public, but just being able to go through that with all of us, correct?
Work session for yourself,
We could do a work session.
I think we could do it in one meeting.
I think we could, if we had a one meeting, we could do a work session.
Buy pizza, we could definitely do it. We could try.
Yeah.
If you needed a second one, please feel
Sure,
free to do so. We want this to be as good as we can.
Sure.
Again, that would be a work session, not a hearing, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We're not gonna hold public hearings, that's for the BoCC. Their document, that's why they chose to do it. We're very thankful.
And we're open to critical thinking on this one.
You almost said criticism, but critical thinking.
Caught you.
You got yourself.
Criticism is a daily adventure, so.
You like critical
Critical
thinking.
thinking is good.
As we're here, by the way, just a comment about Carl. I mean, going forward, you know, we have what we call dangling issues, what I call dangling issues with respect to the land use code. Stewardship areas were one of those, but we had others that we were hopeful of coming back and taking a look at after the land use code amendments were passed. Just a recommendation from me, I wouldn't say this is from the entire planning commission, but I don't know what your plans are for Carl going forward, or I don't know what his plans are either. But this would be a role, it seems to me, I know you have some other things like housing, right, for him, but some of these other issues that are out there would be very helpful for the planning commission to maybe get back into. in preparation for a new planning director coming back, because it's kind of extending what our consideration and thought has been into some subject areas, and we still have a chance to take a look at those and bring those back to the county commissioners. So if that's, would be amenable to him and y'all, that would be a helpful thing, I think, to us.
That's going to be a future discussion, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I want to thank all you guys for your hard work on this and appreciate the comments tonight.
Thank you.
Looks like we're on the right track. Jacob, you got anything?
Yeah, I'll just recap some of the things I heard, and please, over the next couple weeks, if you have something that I didn't get or you think of, reach out to me just so I can get with Carl and we can plan to hash these things out. Just a few things. We're gonna look at density, rewriting to address the seemingly unlimited potential. I have potentially looking at the notification process, look at the odor management plan if it is in fact required of all small, medium, and large, and taking a hard look at home business, particularly storage areas. Like I said, if there's something I missed, let's.
To the
Intergovernmental agreements.
the to be grid.
I think we're gonna go through that probably.
Yeah.
Oh,
line by
okay,
line.
as long as it's on your list, it's okay.
And then IGAs. Well, I guess we don't have much with IGAs, but.
Yeah, but
Well,
That's kind of the challenge of the IGAs. I mean, technically, we really need to have a good solid draft to take to the municipalities before we can even address those IGAs, so.
okay.
We can start the process, but we need to have a solid draft. So.
And I'd like to thank the members of the public who came here tonight with an interest in how this is going. I know Eli and his group has provided some really insightful edits on these over the past few months. And Carl, I'd like to say thank you again. You put a lot of work and time into this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I bet, you know, about early on in your tenure with Delta County, and I said, hey, let's just take little bite-sized chunks of this and fix it one piece at a time. I bet you're thinking maybe I had a good thought process then, huh?
Whether you take it in little bites or all at once, it's still time. But, yeah.
Well, very good, everybody. We look forward to hearing back from you.
Thank you.
Are we adjourned?
So the 23rd.